This is a continuation of The Big Time by Fritz Leiber, comprising chapters 8 and 9. Chapter 8. A Place to Stand. Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world. Archimedes. Bruce's voice had a faraway touch, and he was looking up left at the void as he said, "Have you ever really wondered why the two sides of this war are called the snakes and the spiders? Snakes may be clear enough. You always call the enemy something dirty. But spiders, our name for ourselves? Bear with me, Ilhilihis. I know that no being is created dirty or malignant by nature, but this is a matter of anthropoid feelings and folkways. Yes, Mark, I know that some of your legions have nicknames like the Drunken Lions and the Snails, and that's about as insulting as calling the British Expeditionary Force the Old Contemptibles. No, you'd have to go to bands of vicious youths in cities slated for ruin to find a habit of naming like ours, and even they would try to brighten up the black a bit. But simply, spiders and snakes. For that's their name for themselves too, you know. Spiders and snakes. What are our masters that we give them names like that? It gave me the shivers and set my mind working in a dozen directions, and I couldn't stop it, although it made the shivers worse. Illy beside me now. I'd never given it a thought before, but he did have 8 legs of a sort, and I remembered thinking of him as a spider monkey. And hadn't the Lunans had wisdom and atomic power and a billion years in which to get the change war rolling? Or suppose, in the far future, Terra's own spiders evolved intelligence and a cruel cannibal culture. They'd be able to keep their existence secret. I had no idea of who or what would be on Earth in Seven Seas Day, and wouldn't it be perfect black hairy poison spider mentality to spin webs secretly through the world of thought and all of space and time? And Bo, wasn't there something real snaky about him, the way he moved and all? Spiders and snakes. Spinne und Schlange, as Erich called them. S and S. But SS stood for the Nazi Schutzstaffel, the black shirts. And what if some of those cruel, crazy Jerrys had discovered time travel and... I brought myself up with a jerk and asked myself, Greta, how nuts can you get? From where he was on the floor, the front of the bar, his sounding board, Doc shrieked up at Bruce like one of the damned from the pit. Don't speak against the spiders. Don't blaspheme. They can hear the unborn whisper. Others whip only the skin, but they whip the naked brain and heart. And Erich called out, "That's enough, Bruce." But Bruce didn't spare him a look and said, "But whatever the spiders are, and no matter how much whip they use, it's plain as the telltale on the maintainer that the change war is not only going against them, but getting away from them." Dwell for a bit on the current flurry of stupid slugging and panicky anachronism, when we all know that anachronism is what gets the change winds out of control. This punch-drunk pounding on the Cretan-Dorian fracas as if it were the only battle going and the only way to work things. Whisking Constantine from Britain to the Bosporus by rocket, sending a pocket submarine back to sail with the Armada against Drake's wooden sides. I'll wager you hadn't heard those. And now, to save Rome, an atomic bomb. Ye gods! They could have used Greek fire or even dynamite, but a fission weapon. I leave you to imagine what gaps and scars that will make in what's left of history. The smothering of Greece, and the vanishment of Provence, and the troubadours and the papacy's Irish captivity won't be in it. The cut on his cheek had opened again and was oozing a little, but he didn't pay any attention to it, and neither did we, as his lips thinned in irony and he said, "But I'm forgetting that this is a cosmic war, and that the spiders are conducting operations on billions, trillions of planets and inhabited gas clouds through millions of ages, and that we're just one little world, one little solar system, 7C. And we can hardly expect our inscrutable masters, with all their pressing preoccupations and far-flung responsibilities, to be especially understanding or tender in their treatment of our pet books and centuries, our favorite prophets and periods, or unduly concerned about preserving any of the trifles that we just happen to hold dear. Perhaps there are some sentimentalists who would rather die forever than go on living in a world without the summa, the field equations, process and reality, Hamlet, Matthew Keats, and the Odyssey. But our masters are practical creatures, ministering to the needs of those rugged souls who want to go on living no matter what. Eric's, "Bruce, I'm telling you that's enough," was lost in the quickening flow of the new boy's words. I won't spend much time on the minor signs of our major crack-up. The canceling of leaves, the sharper shortages, the loss of the express room, the use of recuperation stations for ops and all the other frantic patchwork. Last operation but one. We were saddled with 3 soldiers from outside the galaxy and, no fault of theirs, they were no earthly use. Such little things might happen at a bad spot in any war and are perhaps only local. But there's a big thing. He paused again, to let us wonder, I guess. Maud must have worked her way over to me, for I felt her dry little hand on my arm, and she whispered out of the side of her mouth, "What do we do now?" "We listen," I told her the same way. I felt a little impatient with her need to be doing something about things. She cocked a gold-dusted eyebrow at me and murmured, "You too?" I didn't get to ask her me too. What? Crush on Bruce? Nuts. Because just then, Bruce's voice took up again in the faraway range. "Have you ever asked yourselves how many operations the fabric of history can stand before it's all stitches? Whether too much change won't one day wear out the past? And the present and the future too, the whole bleeding business. Is the law of the conservation of reality any more than a thin hope given a long name, a prayer of theoreticians? Change death is as certain as heat death, and far faster. Every operation leaves reality a bit cruder, a bit uglier, a bit more makeshift, and a whole lot less rich in those details and feelings that are our heritage, like the crude penciled sketch on canvas when you've stripped off the paint. If that goes on, won't the cosmos collapse into an outline of itself, then nothing? How much thinning can reality stand, having more and more double-gangers cut out of it? And there's another thing about every operation. It wakes up the zombies a little more, and as its change winds die, it leaves them a little more disturbed and nightmare-ridden and frazzled. Those of you who have been on operations in heavily worked-over temporal areas will know what I mean. That look they give you out of the sides of their eyes as if to say, "You again? For Christ's sake, go away. We're the dead. We're the ones who don't want to wake up, who don't want to be demons and hate to be ghosts. Stop torturing us." I looked around at the ghost girls. I couldn't help it. They'd somehow got together on the control divan, facing us, their backs to the maintainers. The Countess had dragged along the bottle of wine Eric had fetched her earlier, and they were passing it back and forth. The Countess had a big rose splotch across the ruffled white lace of her blouse. Bruce said, "There'll come a day when all the zombies and all the unborn wake up and go crazy together, and figuratively come marching at us in their numberless hordes, saying, 'We've had enough.'" But I didn't turn back to Bruce right away. Phryne's chiton had slipped off one shoulder, and she and the Countess were sitting sagged forward, elbows on knees, legs spread, at least, as far as the Countess's hobble skirt would let her, and swayed toward each other a little. They were still surprisingly solid, although they hadn't had any personal attention for a half hour, and they were looking up over my head with half-shut eyes, and they seemed, so help me, to be listening to what Bruce was saying and maybe hearing some of it. We make a careful distinction between zombies and unborn, between those troubled by our operations, whose lifelines lie in the past, and those whose lifelines lie in the future. But is there any distinction any longer? Can we tell the difference between the past and the future? Can we any longer locate the now, the real now of the cosmos? The places have their own nows, the now of the big time we're on, but that's different, and it's not made for real living. The spiders tell us that the real now is somewhere in the last half of the 20th century, which means that several of us here are also alive in the cosmos, have lifelines along which the now is traveling. But do you swallow that story quite so easily, Ilhilihis 7C? How does it strike the servants of the triple goddess, the spiders of Octavian Rome, the demons of Good Queen Bess, the gentlemen zombies of the Greater South? Do the unborn man the starships, Maud? He let that start to sink in, then took a couple of quick steps and went on, his voice rising over Eric's, "Bruce, for the last time," and seeming to pick up a note of hope from the very word he had used. But although things look terrifyingly black, there remains a chance, the slimmest chance, but still a chance, of saving the cosmos from change death and restoring reality's richness and giving the ghosts good sleep and perhaps even regaining the real now. We have the means right at hand. What if the power of time traveling were used not for war and destruction, but for healing, for the mutual enrichment of the ages, for quiet communication and growth in brief, to bring a peace message. But my little commandant is quite an actor himself and knows a wee bit about the principles of scene stealing. And he was not going to let Bruce drown him out as if he were just another extra playing a voice from the mob. He darted across our front between us and the bar, took a running leap, and landed bang on the bloody box of bomb. A bit later, Maud was silently showing me the white ring above her elbow where I'd grabbed her, and Illy was teasing a clutch of his tentacles out of my other hand and squeaking reproachfully, "Greta, girl, don't ever do that." Eric was standing on the chest, and I noticed that his boots carefully straddled the circle of skulls, and I should have known anyway you could hardly push them in the right order by jumping on them. And he was pointing at Bruce and saying, "And that means mutiny, my young sir. Goddess willin', Bruce. Listen to me and step down before you say anything worse. I'm older than you, Bruce. Mark's older. Trust in your kameraden. Guide yourself by their knowledge." He had got my attention, but I had much rather have him black my eye. "You older than me?" Bruce was grinning. "When your 12 years' advantage was spent in soaking up the wisdom of a race of sadistic dreamers gone paranoid, in a world whose thought stream had already been muddied by one total war? Mark older than me? When all his ideas and loyalties are those of a wolf pack of unimaginative sluggers 2,000 years younger than I am? Either of you older, because you have more of the killing cynicism that is all the wisdom the change world ever gives you? Don't make me laugh. I'm an Englishman, and I come from an epoch when total war was still a desecration, and the flowers and buds of thoughts not yet whacked off or blighted. I'm a poet, and poets are wiser than anyone because they're the only people who have the guts to think and feel at the same time. Right, Sid? When I talk to all of you about a peace message, I want you to think about it concretely in terms of using the places to bring help across the mountains of time when help is really needed, not to bring help that's undeserved, or knowledge that's premature or contaminating, sometimes not to bring anything at all, but just to check with infinite tenderness and concern that everything's safe and the glories of the universe unfolding as they were intended to. Yes, you are a poet, Bruce, Eric broke in. You can tootle soulfully on the flute and make us drip tears. You can let out the stops on the big organ pipes and make us tremble as if at Jehovah's footsteps. For the last 20 minutes you have been giving us some very charmant poetry. But what are you? An entertainer? Or are you a soldier? Right then. I don't know what it was. Maybe Sid clearing his throat. I could sense our feelings beginning to turn against Bruce. I got the strangest feeling of reality clamping down and bright colors going dull and dreams vanishing. Yet it was only then I also realized how much Bruce had moved us, maybe some of us to the verge of mutiny even. I was mad at Eric for what he was doing, but I couldn't help admiring his cockiness. I was still under the spell of Bruce's words and the more than words behind them. But then Eric would shift around a bit, and one of his heels would kick near the Death's Head push buttons, and I wanted to stamp with spike heels on every Death's Head button on his uniform. I didn't know exactly what I felt yet. Yes, I'm a soldier, Bruce told him. And I hope you won't ever have to worry about my courage. Because it's going to take more courage than any operation we've ever planned, ever dreamed of, to carry the peace message to the other places and to the wound spots of the cosmos. Perhaps it will be a fast wicket and we'll be bowled down before we score a single run. But who cares? We may at least see our real masters when they come to smash us, and for me, that will be a deep satisfaction. And we may do some smashing of our own. So you're a soldier, Eric said, his smile showing his teeth. Bruce, I'll admit that the half-dozen operations you've been on were rougher than anything I drew in my first 100 sleeps. For that, I am all honest sympathy. But that you should let them get you into such a state that love and a girl can turn you upside down and start you babbling about peace messages. Yes, by God, love and a girl have changed me, Bruce shouted at him. And I looked around at Lily, and I remembered Dave saying, I'm going to Spain. And I wondered if anything would ever again make my face flame like that. Or rather, they've made me stand up for what I've believed in all along. They've made me. Wunderbar, Eric called, and began to do a little sissy dance on the bomb that set my teeth on edge. He bent his wrists and elbows at arty angles and stuck out a hip and ducked his head simperingly and blinked his eyes very fast. Will you invite me to the wedding, Bruce? You'll have to get another best man, but I will be the flower girl and throw pretty little posies to all the distinguished guests. Here, Mark. Catch, KB. One for you, Greta. Dankeschön. Ach, 2 Herzen in Dreivierteltakt. Ta ta. Ta ta. Ta 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 ta. What the hell do you think a woman is? Bruce raged. Something to mess around with in your spare time? Eric kept on humming 2 Hearts in waltz time, and jigging around to it, damn him. But he slipped in a nod to Bruce and a precisely. So I knew where I stood, but it was no news to me. Very well, Bruce said. Let's leave this brown shirt Maricon to amuse himself and get down to business. I made all of you a proposal, and I don't have to tell you how serious it is, or how serious Lily and I are about it. We not only must infiltrate and subvert other places, which luckily for us are made for infiltration, we also must make contact with the snakes and establish working relationships with their demons at our level as one of our first steps. That stopped Eric's jig, and got enough of a gasp from some of us to make it seem to come from practically everybody. Eric used it to work a change of pace. Bruce, we've let you carry this foolery further than we should. You seem to have the idea that because anything goes in the place, dueling, drunkenness, and so waiter, you can say what you have and it will all be forgotten with the hangover. Not so. It is true that among such a set of monsters and free spirits as ourselves, and working as secret agents to boot, there cannot be the obvious military discipline that would obtain in a Terran army. But let me tell you, Bruce, let me grind it home into you. Sid and KB and Mark will bear me out in this, as officers of equivalent rank, that the spider line of command stretches into and through this place just as surely as the word of der Führer rules Chicago. And as I shouldn't have to emphasize to you, Bruce, the spiders have punishments that would make my countrymen in Belsen and Buchenwald, well, pale a little. So while there is still a shadow of justification for our interpreting your remarks as utterly tasteless clowning. Babble on, Bruce said, giving him a loose downward wave of his hand without looking. I made you people a proposal. He paused. How do you stand, Sidney Lessingham? Then I felt my legs getting weak, because Sid didn't answer right away. The old boy swallowed, and started to look around at the rest of us. Then the feeling of reality clamping down got something awful, because he didn't look around, but straightened his back a little. Just then, Mark cut in fast. It grieves me, Bruce, but I think you are possessed. Eric, he must be confined. KB nodded, almost absently. Confine or kill the coward, whichever is easier. Whip the woman, and let's get on to the Egyptian battle. Indeed, yes, Mark said. I died in it, but now perhaps no longer. KB said to him, I like you, Roman. Bruce was smiling, barely, and his eyes were moving and fixing. You, Ilhilihis? Illy's squeakbox had never sounded mechanical to me before, but it did as he answered. I'm a lot deeper into borrowed time than the rest of you, tra-la-la. But Papa still loves living. Include me very much out, Brucey. Miss Davies? Beside me, Maud said flatly, Do you think I'm a fool? Beyond her, I saw Lily, and I thought, my God, I might look as proud if I were in her shoes, but I sure as hell wouldn't look as confident. Bruce's eyes hadn't quite come to bow when the gambler spoke up. I have no cause to like you, sir. Rather the opposite. But this place has come to bore me more than Boston, and I have always found it difficult to resist a long shot. A very long one, I fear. I am with you, sir. There was a pain in my chest and a roaring in my ears, and through it I heard 7C grunting, Sick of these lousy spiders! Deal me in! And right behind his words, Bo sang out fast the English of it, Kill the spiders! And the Germans! And Doc didn't collapse then, though I could see he was hanging onto the bar tight with his other hand, and the place got stiller, inside and out, than I've ever known it, and Bruce's eyes were finally moving back toward Sid. But the eyes stopped short of Sid, and I heard Bruce say, Miss Forzane? And I thought, that's funny. And I started to look around at the Countess, and felt all the eyes, and I realized, hey, that's me. But this can't happen to me. To the others, yes, but not to me. I just work here. Not to Greta, no, no, no. But it had, and the eyes didn't let go, and the silence and the feeling of reality were god-awful, and I said to myself, Greta, You've got to say something, if only a suitable four-letter word. And then suddenly I knew what the silence was like. It was like that of a big city if there were some way of shutting off all the noise in 1 second. It was like Eric's singing when the piano had deserted him. It was as if the change winds should ever die completely. And I knew beforehand what had happened when I turned my back on them all. The ghost girls were gone. The major maintainer hadn't merely been switched to introvert. It was gone too. Chapter 9. A Locked Room. We examined the moss between the bricks and found it undisturbed. Certainly. We opened every package and parcel. We not only opened every book, but we turned over every leaf in each volume. Poe. 3 hours later, Sid and I plumped down on the couch nearest the kitchen, though too tired to want to eat for a while yet. A tighter search than I could ever have cooked up had shown that the maintainer was not in the place. Of course it had to be in the place, as we kept telling each other for the first 2 hours. It had to be, if circumstances and the theories we lived by in the change world meant anything. A maintainer is what maintains a place. The minor maintainer takes care of oxygen, temperature, humidity, gravity, and other little life cycle and matter cycle things generally. But it's the major maintainer that keeps the walls from buckling and the ceiling from falling in. It is little, but oh my, it does so much. It doesn't work by wires or radio or anything complicated like that. It just hooks into local space-time. I have been told that its inside working part is made up of vastly tough, vastly hard giant molecules, each one of which is practically a vest pocket cosmos in itself. Outside, it looks like a portable radio with a few more dials and some telltales and switches and plug-ins for earphones and a lot of other sensory thingamajigs. But the maintainer was gone, and the void hadn't closed in yet. By this time, I was so fagged I didn't care much whether it did or not. Anyway, I said to myself, Greta, if this is introversion, I want no part of it. It is not nice to be cut adrift from the cosmos and know it. A lifeboat in the middle of the Pacific and a starship between galaxies are not in it for loneliness. I asked myself why the spiders had ever equipped maintainers with introversion switches anyway, when we couldn't drill with them and weren't supposed to use them except in an emergency so tight that it was either introvert or surrender to the snakes. And for the first time, the obvious explanation came to me. Introversion must be the same as scuttling, its main purpose to withhold secrets and materiel from the enemy. It put a place into a situation from which even the Spider High Command couldn't rescue it, and there was nothing left but to sink down, out, up, down into the void. If that was the case, our chances of getting back were about those of my being a kid again playing in the dunes on the small time. I edged a little closer to Sid and sort of squunched under his shoulder and rubbed my cheek against the smudged gold-worked gray velvet. He looked down and I said, "A long way to Lynn Regis, eh, Siddy?" "Sweetling, thou spokest a mouthful," he said. He knows very well what he is doing when he mixes his language that way, the wicked old darling. "Siddy," I said, "why this gold work? It'd be a lot smoother without it." "Marry, men must prick themselves out and, faith I know not, but it helps if there's metal in it. And girls get scratched." I took a little sniff. "But don't put this doublet through the cleaner yet. Until we get out of the woods, I want as much you around as possible." "Marry, and why should I?" he asked blankly. And I think he wasn't fooling me. The last thing time travelers find out is how they do, or don't smell. Then his face clouded, and he looked as though he wanted to squunch under my shoulder. "But faith, sweetling, your forest has a few more trees than Sherwood." "Thou saidst it," I agreed, and wondered about the look. He oughtn't to be interested in my girlishness now. I knew I was a mess, but he had stuck pretty close to me during the hunt, and you never can tell. Then I remembered that he was the other one who hadn't declared himself when Bruce was putting it to us, and it probably troubled his male vanity. Not me, though. I was still grateful to the maintainer for getting me out of that spot, whatever other it had got us all into. It seemed ages ago. We'd all jumped to the conclusion that the two ghost girls had run away with the maintainer. I don't know where or why. But it looked so much that way. Maud had started yipping about how she'd never trusted ghosts, and always known that someday they'd start doing things on their own. And KB had got it firmly fixed in her head, right between the horns, that Phryne, being a Greek, was the ringleader, and was going to wreak havoc on us all. But when we were checking stores the first time, I had noticed that the Ghost Girl envelopes looked flat. Ectoplasm doesn't take up much space when it's folded, but I had opened one anyway, then another, and then called for help. Every last envelope was empty. We had lost over 1,000 Ghost Girls, Sid's whole stock. Well, at least it proved what none of us had ever seen or heard of being demonstrated, that there is a spooky link, a sort of change-wind contact, between a ghost and its lifeline. And when that umbilicus, I've heard it called, is cut, the part away from the lifeline dies. Interesting, but what had bothered me was whether we demons were going to evaporate too, because we are as much doublegangers as the ghosts, and our apron strings had been cut just as surely. We're more solid, of course, but that would only mean we'd take a little longer. Very logical. I remember I had looked up at Lily and Maud. Us girls had been checking the envelopes. It's one of the proprieties we frequently maintain, and anyway, if men check them, they're apt to trot out that old wheeze about instant women, which I'm sick to death of hearing, thank you. Anyway, I had looked up and said, "It's been nice knowing you." And Lily had said, 23, skidoo. And Maud had said, "Here goes nothing." And we had shook hands all around. We figured that Phryne and the Countess had faded at the same time as the other ghost girls, but an idea had been nibbling at me and I said, "Siddy, do you suppose it's just barely possible that, while we were all looking at Bruce, those two ghost girls would have been able to work the maintainer and get a door and lamb out of here with the thing?" "Thou speakst my thoughts, sweetling. All ways against it. Imprimis, 'tis well known that ghosts cannot lay plots or act on them. Secundo, the time forbade getting a door. Tertio, and here's the real meat of it. The place folds without the maintainer. Quadro, 'twere folly to depend on not one of— how many of us? 10, elf, not looking around in all the time it would have taken them. I looked around once, Siddy. They were drinking, and they had got to the control divan under their own power. Now, when was that? Oh yes, when Bruce was talking about zombies. Yes, sweetling, and as I was about to cap my argument with Quinquo when you gan prattle, I could have sworn none could touch the maintainer, much less work it and purloin it, without my certain knowledge. Yet. Eftsoons yet, I seconded him. Somebody must have got a door and walked out with the thing. It certainly wasn't in the place. The hunt had been a Lulu. Something the size of a portable typewriter is not easy to hide, and we had been inside everything from Beau's piano to the renewer link of the refresher. We had even fluoroscoped everybody, though it had made Illy writhe like a box of worms as he'd warned us. He said it tickled terribly, and I insisted on smoothing his fur for 5 minutes afterward, although he was a little standoffish toward me. Some areas, like the bar, kitchen, and stores, took a long while, but we were thorough. KB helped Doc check surgery. Since she last made the place, she has been stationed in a field hospital. It turns out the spiders actually are mounting operations from them, and learned a few nice new wrinkles. However, Doc put in some honest work on his own, though, of course, every check was observed by at least 3 people, not including Bruce or Lily. When the maintainer vanished, Doc had pulled out of his glassy-eyed drunk in a way that would have surprised me if I hadn't seen it happen to him before. But when we finished surgery and got onto the art gallery, he'd started to putter, and I noticed him hold out his coat and duck his head and whip out a flask and take a swig, and by now he was well on his way toward another peak. The art gallery had taken time too, because there's such a jumble of strange stuff, and it broke my heart, but KB took her axe and split a beautiful blue wood carving of a Venusian Medusa. Because, although there wasn't a mark in the paw-polished surface, she claimed it was just big enough. Doc cried a little, and we left him fitting the pieces together and mooning over the other stuff. After we'd finished everything else, Mark had insisted on tackling the floor. Beau and Sid both tried to explain to him how this is a one-sided place, that there is nothing but nothing under the floor. It just gets a lot harder than the diamonds crusting it as soon as you get a 1/4 inch down, that being the solid equivalent of the void. But Mark was knuckle-headed. Like all Romans, Sid assured me on the QT, and broke 4 diamond-plus drills before he was satisfied. Except for some trick hiding places, that left the void, and things don't vanish if you throw them at the void. They half melt and freeze forever unless you can fish them out. Back of the refresher, at about eye level, are 3 Venusian coconuts that a Hittite strongman threw there during a major brawl. I try not to look at them because they are so much like witch heads they give me the woolies. The parts of the place right up against the void have strange spatial properties which one of the gadgets in surgery makes use of in a way that gives me the worse woolies, but that's beside the point. During the hunt, KB and Eric had used their collars as direction finders to point out the maintainer, just as they're used in the cosmos to locate the door. And sometimes in the big places, people tell me. But the collars only went wild, like a compass needle whirling around without stopping, and nobody knew what that meant. The trick hiding places were the minor maintainer, a cute idea, but it is no bigger than the major and has its own mysterious insides, and had obviously kept on doing its own work. So that was out for several reasons. And the bomb chest, though it seemed impossible for anyone to have opened it, granting they knew the secret of its lock, even before Eric jumped on it and put it in the limelight double. But when you've ruled out everything else, the word impossible changes meaning. Since time travel is our business, a person might think of all sorts of tricks for sending the maintainer into the past or future, permanently or temporarily. But the place is strictly on the big time, and everybody that should know tells me that time traveling through the big time is out. It's this way. The big time is a train, and the little time is the countryside, and we're on the train, unless we go out a door, and as Gertie Stein might put it, you can't time travel through the time you time travel in when you time travel. I'd also played around with the idea of some fantastically obvious hiding place. Maybe something that several people could pass back and forth between them, which would mean a conspiracy. And, of course, if you assume a big enough conspiracy, you can explain anything, including the cosmos itself. Still, I'd got a sort of shell game idea about the soldiers' 3 big black shakos, and I hadn't been satisfied until I'd got the 3 together and looked in them all at the same time. Wake up, Greta, and take something. I can't stand here forever. Maud had brought us a tray of hearty snacks from then and yon, and I must say they were tempting. She whips up a mean hors d'oeuvre. I looked them over and said, "City, I want a hot dog. And I want a venison pasty. Out upon you, you finical Jill, you o'erscrupulous jade, you whimsic and tyrannous poppet." I grabbed a handful and snuggled back against him. "Go on, call me some more, City," I told him. "Real juicy ones." This concludes the 4th part of 7 total of The Big Time by Fritz Leiber, produced by Best Audiobooks for free.